C.S. Lewis profoundly observed, "Pride leads to every other vice. It is the complete anti-God state of mind." This statement cuts to the heart of the matter, revealing pride as not just a sin, but the very essence of what separates us from God. Have you ever wondered why certain struggles in your life seem so persistent, so deeply rooted, as if there's an invisible barrier between you and the peace you seek? Could it be that pride, in its quiet, cunning way, has woven itself into your thoughts, your actions, and even your faith? Pride was the sin that began a cosmic war in heaven, a rebellion that cast Lucifer down from glory. It was the moment when the devil, consumed by his own self-exaltation, declared, "I will," 5 times, elevating his will above God's. This pride, this original sin, has since found its way into the fabric of human nature, leading us to believe we can live independently of God. But here's the truth: pride is the root of all sin, the mother of all transgressions, and it thrives on the illusion of self-sufficiency. C.S. Lewis called it the utmost evil, explaining that pride is the ultimate vice because it is the complete rejection of God's authority. It is not just a sin among many, it is the sin that gives birth to all others. Unchecked, it blinds us to our need for God's grace, leading us down a path of destruction. Yet, in recognizing pride, we are given the opportunity to choose a different path, the path of humility. Humility is the antidote to pride, the choice to surrender our will to God's will, and in doing so, we open ourselves to His grace, His mercy, and His love. As we journey together through this message, I encourage you to reflect on the areas of your life where pride might have taken root. How has it shaped your decisions, your relationships, and your spiritual walk? There is hope in this reflection, for in humility, we find the strength to overcome pride and draw nearer to God. Stay with me as we explore practical steps to uproot pride from our lives, allowing God's transforming power to bring true freedom and peace. If this message has touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement helps us build a community of believers who are committed to walking humbly with God. Let's continue this journey together, seeking His truth and embracing the freedom that comes from living a life surrendered to Him. Can I get a shout of praise from you? C.S. Lewis profoundly observed, "Pride leads to every other vice. It is the complete anti-God state of mind." This statement doesn't merely reveal the destructive nature of pride, it acts as a mirror, reflecting the ways in which pride distorts our relationship with God. Have you ever found yourself questioning why certain choices or successes feel hollow, leaving a void that nothing seems to fill? Could it be that pride has quietly taken root, urging you to live as though you are self-sufficient, independent of God's guidance and grace? To fully grasp the depth of pride's corrosive influence, we must revisit its origins, for it was pride that led to the first rebellion in heaven. Lucifer, once the most radiant of angels, was not content with his exalted position. He gazed upon the glory of God and desired to usurp it, not out of a longing for holiness or righteousness, but out of a burning ambition to rival and surpass his Creator. When he declared, "I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, I will make myself like the Most High," Lucifer wasn't just challenging God's sovereignty, he was rejecting the very core of humility, the bedrock upon which true worship is built. C.S. Lewis often delved into the nature of pride and its opposition to humility, describing it as the anti-God state of mind because it places self above all else. In his writings, Lewis cautioned that pride doesn't simply turn us away from God, it actively pits us against Him, making us adversaries of the one who desires our true fulfillment. Reflect for a moment. Have you ever experienced that inner turmoil when pursuing something you knew wasn't aligned with God's will? That unsettling feeling could be the consequence of pride, whispering that you don't need God, that you can chart your own course without His wisdom. Lewis's exploration of pride resonates deeply because it uncovers a fundamental truth about the human condition. Pride convinces us that we are the center of our universe, but in doing so, it isolates us from the source of all love and goodness. Consider the story of Lucifer. His fall was not just a cosmic event, but a tragic narrative that echoes in our own lives whenever we choose self over submission to God. The rebellion of Lucifer was rooted in a refusal to worship, to acknowledge that God alone is worthy of all glory. It's a cautionary tale that challenges us to examine our own hearts. Are we elevating ourselves in ways that distance us from God? Are we, like Lucifer, trying to ascend to heights that were never meant for us? In Mere Christianity, Lewis emphasizes that pride is not just another sin, but the great sin, because it leads to every other vice. It's a sin that blinds us to our need for God, convincing us that we are sufficient in ourselves. This deception is why pride is so dangerous. It not only separates us from God, but also from others, as we become increasingly consumed with our own importance. Ask yourself, in what areas of your life might pride be subtly at work? Is it in your relationships, where you find it difficult to apologize or forgive? Or perhaps in your achievements, where you feel a quiet sense of superiority? Lewis would urge us to confront these manifestations of pride, not with guilt, but with a humble recognition of our need for God's grace. He reminds us that true worship begins with the acknowledgement of our place before God, not as rivals but as His creation, designed to reflect His glory, not our own. As we reflect on Lewis's insights, let us strive to root out pride from our hearts, seeking instead the path of humility. For it is in humility that we draw closer to God, experiencing the fullness of His love and the joy of true worship. The challenge before us is clear. Will we allow pride to drive a wedge between us and our Creator? Or will we, in humility, submit to His will, knowing that in doing so we find our true purpose and peace? This same pride that led to Lucifer's downfall found its way into the hearts of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. God had provided them with everything they needed, yet when the serpent whispered, "You will not surely die. You will be like God," knowing good and evil, they doubted God's goodness. They questioned His intentions, thinking perhaps He was withholding something from them, something that could make them equal to God. In that moment of distrust and desire for autonomy, they chose to disobey, allowing pride to sever their perfect relationship with God. Now, you might be wondering, what does this ancient story have to do with my life today? The truth is, pride is not just a relic of the past, it's a present reality that affects every one of us. Think about the times you've felt a subtle sense of superiority, a desire to be recognized, or a need to control situations rather than surrendering them to God. That's pride, whispering that you don't need God, that you can manage on your own. Pride, as C.S. Lewis profoundly observed, is not just a flaw in character but the very root of all rebellion against the divine. Lewis once wrote, "Pride leads to every other vice. It is the complete anti-God state of mind." This statement captures the essence of why pride is considered so dangerous, as reflected in Proverbs 6:16-17, where it says, "These 6 things the Lord hates, yes, 7 are an abomination to Him: a proud look." The proud look is more than just an expression. It represents a heart that believes it is self-sufficient, independent of God. This belief is not only false but destructive, as it plants a seed that, if allowed to grow, bears a harvest of all manner of sins: lying, deceit, envy, and even murder. Why does God regard pride with such severity, even placing it above sins like murder and lying? It's because pride is the doorway through which all other sins enter. It whispers the dangerous lie that we are enough on our own, that we do not need God. This lie is the most perilous of all because it distances us from the very source of life and truth. But in this realization lies the hope. God's hatred is not directed at us but at the sin that ensnares us, drawing us away from His love. As Lewis aptly put it, as long as you are proud, you cannot know God. A proud man is always looking down on things and people, and of course, as long as you are looking down, you cannot see something that is above you. Pride blinds us to our need for God, trapping us in a cycle of self-reliance that leads only to despair. Yet, humility, recognizing our dependence on God, breaks this cycle. Have you ever felt that subtle voice inside, telling you that you are enough on your own, that you can handle life without God's help? It's a voice that promises strength but delivers isolation. The truth is, in our moments of greatest humility, when we acknowledge our need for God, we find the path to true freedom, joy, and fulfillment, we discover that in our weakness, His strength is made perfect. So, what steps can you take today to surrender that pride and draw nearer to God? It begins with a simple acknowledgement of our need for Him. By submitting to His will, we open ourselves to the fullness of life that He offers, a life not burdened by the weight of pride, but lifted by the grace of humility. Let this be the moment you choose to look up, to see the one who is above you, waiting to fill your life with His peace and joy. As we journey through life, it's crucial to pause and reflect on the subtle ways in which pride has woven itself into the fabric of our daily existence. Consider this: in what aspects of your life has pride taken root, quietly replacing your dependence on God with a reliance on self? These are not easy questions to confront, yet they are essential if we are to free ourselves from the grip of pride, which often disguises itself as strength or self-sufficiency. C.S. Lewis, a man of profound insight into the human soul, once described pride as the spiritual cancer. It eats up the very possibility of love, or contentment, or even common sense. His words serve as a powerful reminder that pride, left unchecked, can erode the very foundations of our faith and our ability to experience true joy. Have you ever found yourself achieving great things, only to feel an inexplicable emptiness afterward? The accolades, the successes, the moments of recognition, do they truly satisfy, or do they leave you with a lingering sense of something missing? This hollow feeling, this quiet discontent, may be a sign that pride has crept into your heart. It whispers that your worth is measured by your accomplishments, your status, or your ability to navigate life on your own terms. But what happens when those accomplishments lose their luster, when the recognition fades, and when self-reliance leaves you isolated from the grace of God? C.S. Lewis understood this struggle well. He knew that pride not only separates us from others but also from God Himself. He wrote, "As long as you are proud, you cannot know God." A proud man is always looking down on things and people, and of course, as long as you are looking down, you cannot see something that is above you. This profound truth invites us to consider where our gaze is directed. Are we looking up, humbly seeking God's guidance and grace, or are we consumed with looking down, focusing on our own achievements and comparing ourselves to others? In these moments of quiet introspection, we must ask ourselves, where has pride led us astray? How has it distorted our sense of self and our relationship with God? It is in these honest reflections that we find the opportunity to realign our hearts with the humility that God desires for us. As we continue this journey together, let us commit to laying down our pride, lifting our eyes to the one who is above us, and embracing the humility that opens the door to God's transformative grace. In this commitment, we find the true essence of joy and contentment, not in what we can achieve on our own, but in the deep, abiding relationship we cultivate with God. As we dismantle the walls that pride has built, we make room for the love, contentment, and common sense that C.S. Lewis so poignantly describes. And in doing so, we step into a life that is not hollow or empty, but filled with the richness of God's grace, a life that reflects His love in all we do. So, I encourage you to ask yourself, where has pride taken root in your life, and how can you begin to uproot it today? The path to true joy begins with humility, and it is on this path that we encounter the fullness of God's grace. In the world of C.S. Lewis, pride is more than just a vice. It's a pervasive force that can subtly take root in the heart, distorting our understanding of who we truly are. Lewis once described pride as the complete anti-God state of mind. This isn't just about arrogance or vanity. Pride goes deeper, warping our sense of identity and worth. It convinces us that we are the architects of our own lives, that our accomplishments are the ultimate measure of our significance. But as Lewis points out in Mere Christianity, pride is inherently competitive. It thrives on comparison, making us believe that our worth is determined by how we stand against others. This is why pride is so dangerous. It turns our gaze away from God and toward ourselves, creating a barrier between us and the divine grace that sustains us. Have you ever found yourself striving to be the best, to achieve more, only to feel a hollow emptiness inside? Lewis would argue that this is the inevitable result of pride. It promises satisfaction but delivers only a deeper yearning. In our pursuit of personal glory, we distance ourselves from the one source of true fulfillment, God. Lewis reminds us that pride is not just a sin, it's the sin that leads to all other sins, because it is the exaltation of self above all else. When we place ourselves at the center of our universe, we push God to the periphery, and in doing so, we lose sight of the purpose and meaning that only He can provide. Consider this: when Jesus warned against the dangers of pride, He wasn't just concerned about the moral implications, He was pointing to the spiritual blindness it creates. Pride makes it impossible for us to see our need for God, because it fills us with the illusion of self-sufficiency. It's no wonder, then, that God's word pleads, "Deliver us from evil," which, as Lewis would interpret, includes the evil of self-worship. This plea is not just a rejection of overt sins like greed or lust, it's a call to be saved from the subtler, more insidious sin of pride. It's a reminder that our lives are not about our own strength or achievements, but about surrendering to God's will, acknowledging that without Him, all our efforts are in vain. Lewis often spoke about the weight of glory, the idea that our true significance comes not from what we achieve but from being known and loved by God. Pride, however, blinds us to this reality, leading us to chase after fleeting symbols of success and recognition. Have you ever chased after these things, only to find yourself exhausted and unfulfilled? This is the deception of pride. It leads us to build our lives on shaky foundations, promising security but delivering only anxiety and despair. In the end, Lewis's message is clear: pride is the greatest obstacle to experiencing the fullness of God's grace. It places us in opposition to Him, making it impossible for us to receive the love and mercy that He freely offers. The Bible's warning, "I will resist the proud," is not just a statement of God's judgment, but a profound truth about the nature of pride. It's a reminder that in clinging to our own self-importance, we distance ourselves from the very source of life. So, the question remains: will you continue to let pride shape your life? Or will you choose the humility that opens the door to God's grace? As Lewis would challenge us, true greatness lies not in exalting ourselves but in surrendering to the one who is truly great. Yet, there is hope. The antidote to pride is humility, a virtue that is often misunderstood and undervalued in our culture. But humility is not about thinking less of ourselves, it's about thinking of ourselves less and focusing more on God. It's about recognizing our need for His grace and surrendering our will to His. As Lewis puts it, true humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less. When we humble ourselves, we make room for God's grace to fill the void that pride leaves behind. You might be sitting here now, feeling the weight of pride's grip on your life and wondering, how do I break free from this? The answer is not found in our own strength, for as Paul reminds us, without Him, we can do nothing. This truth can be daunting, but it is also liberating. God does not ask us to overcome pride on our own. Instead, He offers us His grace, which begins with the simple yet profound act of acknowledging our need for Him. Take a moment to reflect on the quiet corners of your soul, those hidden places where pride has stealthily taken root. C.S. Lewis once described pride as the great sin, a force so insidious that it clouds our vision, distorts our relationships, and gnaws away at our inner peace. Have you ever paused to consider how pride has crept into your life, subtly influencing your decisions and straining your connections with others? It's a thief, robbing you of the joy that comes from genuine love and the serenity found in contentment. Lewis warns us that pride is not merely a fault, it is, in his words, the complete anti-God state of mind. This spiritual cancer, as he called it, works tirelessly to consume our ability to think clearly, love deeply, and live wisely. The more we strive to control our world and impose our will, the more we find ourselves entangled in restlessness and dissatisfaction. Have you noticed this in your own life? The harder you grasp for control, the more it slips through your fingers, leaving you with a sense of emptiness that nothing seems to fill. But here lies the transformative power of humility, a virtue Lewis held in high esteem. He wrote that humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. It is in this self-forgetfulness that we find true freedom. What would it mean for you to surrender your pride, to let go of the need to be right, to be in control, or to be recognized? Imagine the relief that comes from allowing God to take the central place in your life, where your worth is no longer measured by your achievements or the approval of others, but by your identity as a beloved child of God. Lewis invites us to envision a life where our focus shifts from our own desires and ambitions to the grandeur of God's kingdom and His purposes. What if, instead of striving to prove your significance, you rested in the assurance that your value is already established in the eyes of the Creator? This is the life God offers, a life where His grace, His power, and His glory are the foundations upon which we stand. In this humble surrender, there is a profound paradox. The less we seek our own glory, the more we find true fulfillment. Lewis reminds us that the road to humility is paved with self-examination, so I challenge you to look within and ask yourself, where has pride taken hold? What would it take to release it? And what kind of peace, what kind of freedom might you discover if you did?
This is not just an invitation to let go of pride, but to step into a life marked by the gentle strength of humility, a life where God's grace flows freely, bringing healing to our relationships, clarity to our minds, and deep, abiding peace to our souls.
As we move forward in this journey, I encourage you to reflect deeply on these questions and seek God's help in uprooting pride from your life. Remember, humility is not a sign of weakness, but of strength, God's strength working through you. Take heart, for the same God who resists the proud offers grace to the humble. Let us embrace that grace together, knowing that with God, all things are possible. The struggle with pride is one of the most insidious battles we face as believers. C.S. Lewis once remarked, "A proud man is always looking down on things and people, and of course, as long as you are looking down, you cannot see something that is above you." This observation cuts to the core of our spiritual lives, where pride subtly takes root, convincing us that we are sufficient on our own, that we can handle life's challenges without fully relying on God. But let's pause and ask ourselves, how often do we find ourselves slipping into this mindset, thinking, "I've got this," or "If I could just get a little help, I could do so much more"? Have we ever considered that this very attitude might be what's holding us back from experiencing the fullness of God's power in our lives? Pride is not just a flaw, it's a spiritual blindfold that keeps us from seeing the true source of our strength. It whispers the lie that we are enough on our own, that we only need God's assistance in the most desperate times. Yet, Scripture tells us something very different. James 4 verse 10 urges us, "Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and He shall lift you up." This isn't a mere suggestion, it's a promise. God doesn't say, "I might lift you up." He says, "I will lift you up," but this lifting only comes after we've let go of our pride, after we've surrendered the need to be in control and have acknowledged that without Him, we can do nothing. Imagine the weight that pride places on our souls, the burdens we carry simply because we're too proud to let go. We play this game of humility, sometimes even fooling ourselves into thinking we've humbled ourselves before God, all while still clinging to our self-reliance. But as C.S. Lewis pointed out, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. True humility isn't about self-deprecation, it's about a radical reorientation of our hearts toward God. It's about recognizing that every breath we take, every step we make, is dependent on His grace. Consider this: how many of us have tried to humble ourselves in the sight of others, perhaps even convincing ourselves that we've done enough. But the truth is, we can fool people, we might even fool ourselves, but we can never fool God. He sees through the facade, straight to the pride that still lingers in our hearts. And it's this pride that God resists, for as the Scriptures say, God opposes the proud but shows favor to the humble. James 4 verse 6. The choice is ours. Do we want to see what we can accomplish on our own? Or are we ready to see what God can do through a heart fully surrendered to Him? Pride tells us that we are the architects of our destiny, but humility teaches us that God is the true author of our lives. When we finally lay down our pride and humble ourselves before the Lord, we open the door to His limitless power, grace, and love. So I ask you, what are you holding on to today that pride won't let you release? What blessings might God be ready to pour into your life if only you would humble yourself before Him? Let's take this moment to reflect on the areas where pride has taken root. Are we ready to draw near to God as He has promised to draw near to us? Let's not play games with humility, but instead, let's genuinely seek to humble ourselves in the sight of the Lord, knowing that He will lift us up in His perfect timing. Remember, no one can fool God. The path to true freedom and peace begins with humility. C.S. Lewis once asked, "What would it take for you to lay down your pride, to let go of your ambition, and say, 'Not my will, but thine be done'?" This question strikes at the very core of our human nature, challenging us to confront the illusions we hold about our own strength and capabilities. Have you ever wondered why, despite all your efforts, certain burdens remain heavy, certain problems unsolved? Could it be that in our striving to prove our worth, to showcase what we can do, we have missed the divine invitation to see what God can do through us? Consider the moments when you felt overwhelmed, when life's challenges seemed insurmountable. It's in those very moments that we are called to humility, to step back and acknowledge that our own strength is not enough. God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble, says James 4 verse 6. But what does it truly mean to humble ourselves before God? It means recognizing that the highest position we can aspire to is not one of worldly success or recognition, but that of a servant. When Jesus walked this earth, He did so not as a king demanding to be served, but as a servant, washing the feet of His disciples, healing the sick, and ultimately laying down His life for humanity. Philippians 2 verse 7 tells us, He made Himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant. This was the Son of God, who had every right to be exalted, yet chose the path of humility. Why? Because in God's kingdom, true greatness is found not in being served, but in serving others. Now, reflect on your own life. What if the highest calling you could achieve wasn't in the title you hold, the accolades you receive, or the influence you wield, but in the quiet, often unnoticed acts of service you perform? What if, instead of asking, "What can I achieve?" you began to ask, "How can I serve?" This shift in perspective is what it means to embrace the heart of Christ, to live not for our own glory, but for the glory of God. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less." This powerful truth invites us to examine our motives, to ask ourselves whether our actions are driven by a desire for self-advancement or by a genuine love for God and others. In a world that constantly tells us to seek our own advancement, this call to humility can feel counterintuitive, even painful. But it is in this very act of surrender, of laying down our pride and embracing the role of a servant, that we find true freedom and purpose. Imagine the transformation that could take place in your life if you truly believed that serving others was the highest honor you could attain. How would your relationships change? How would your approach to work, to ministry, to life itself be different? The Apostle Paul understood this when he wrote, "Though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone, to win as many as possible." 1 Corinthians 9 verse 19. Paul knew that his freedom in Christ wasn't a license to live for himself, but a call to serve others, just as Christ had served him. What would it take for you to stop striving to see what you can do and start surrendering to see what God can do? It's a question that requires deep reflection, a willingness to let go of our need for control and allow God's grace to work through us. The promise is clear: humble yourselves before the Lord, and He will lift you up. James 4 verse 10. God's elevation comes not through our efforts to exalt ourselves, but through our willingness to take the lowest place, trusting that He will lift us in His time and in His way. So, where do you find your significance? Is it in your achievements, your status, your ability to control outcomes? Or is it in the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you are loved by God, chosen by Him to serve, and promised His grace as you walk in humility? The highest position in the kingdom of God is not one of authority, but of service. It's a position that Jesus Himself modeled for us, and it's the position He calls each of us to embrace. Let this truth resonate in your heart. You are most like Christ when you serve. In serving, you reflect His love, His humility, and His grace to a world in desperate need of these qualities. And in choosing to serve, you open yourself to the transformative power of God's grace, a grace that lifts up the humble and makes them great in His kingdom. As you move forward, may you do so with a heart set on service, trusting that God, in His perfect timing, will lift you up and use you for His glory. The problem is that we get so concerned and so fixated on what our position is, what our title is, what we have, what we're supposed to do, what we're supposed to accomplish, or what we've done in the past. We get very fixated on what God's called us to do. And we want everybody to know, hey, this is my calling, this is what I'm called to do well. I can tell you what all of us are called to do. We're all called to serve. We're all called to be servants. I'm going to serve people. That's what Jesus did, who has the name above all names. He comes to serve. That's the title that Paul, Peter, James, and Timothy took upon themselves. Your identity is not in what you do. It's not in your title. It's in whose you are. Do you know what the ultimate prize is? The highest prize is knowing Jesus. I think that God loves a humble heart because God has a humble heart. And we see that humble heart just in the way that when He came here to serve us, even with His life and even in His death. He came here to serve us. What is your prayer life like? Because prayer is humility and prayerlessness is pride. When you're praying, you're saying to God, I need you. When you're praying, you're saying to God, I submit to you. When you're not praying, what you're saying is, I don't need you, and I'm just going to do my own thing. Prayer is coming to God, saying, I can't carry these burdens. I don't even know what tomorrow holds. God, you know eternity. You know every event in my future. You know every person that is coming up in my life. You know every decision that I'm about to make. You know every event that's going to happen on earth. I can't navigate, but you, if you will guide me, Lord, I need your guidance and I need your protection. God, I can, in a very limited manner, protect myself. You can protect me from all evil, so prayer says, I need you. I need your direction. I need your power. I need your protection. God, I need you. Prayerlessness says, I don't need you. Every day you wake up, clothe yourself with humility, and the first words you say every day are, God, I need you, and I take everything in my life and surrender it to you. I will use it for your glory and keep me from pride. Keep me from pride.